Hello and welcome to Wineskins, a program featuring reflections on the lives of the saints and sacred scriptures, along with a variety of topics and issues from a Catholic perspective. I'm your host, Father Jim Corda. Our show is sponsored by the annual Bishop's Appeal, the Catholic Communication Campaign, and St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts, a division of the Society of St. Paul. On our show today, I will interview Sister Joyce Candidi on the 75th anniversary of the Diocese of Youngstown. It is from our special television series called Spotlight. We will also hear more about the life of St. Vincent de Paul and the readings for this 25th Sunday in Ordinary Time. That and more on Wineskins. Now I will speak with Steve Caratini, who is the Director of Social Concerns for the Diocese of Youngstown. Welcome to Wineskins. Joining me now is Mr. Steve Caratini, who is the Director of Social Concerns for the Diocese of Youngstown. Welcome to Wineskins.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to be here.
We know that you bring with you a wealth of experience, but we'd like to know right now for us, for our listeners, some of the things that you've been working on in the area of social concerns. What are some of the highlights of areas of social justice that you've been working on that we need to let the folks know about?
Well, I think for me, it's a learning experience and trying to understand our diocese and meet as many people and pastors as I can. I know that there's a long history of service, of the church being of service here in our diocese. Catholic Charities, I think, even predates the founding of the diocese, if I'm correct. One of the first things that I learned is that we have a very generous diocese. One of my responsibilities is to help oversee the Bishop's Appeal. And so this past year, I was basically observing. It's been quite remarkable, the response. So that tells me that people, I think, have an understanding of their obligation, of their need to be of service to those who will need help. I think for us, as I'm sort of surveying the landscape, it seems to me that as we move forward over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that we're going to have to be looking at increasing our services potentially to people who are aging. We have demographics are probably working in a different way in our diocese. We want to make sure that we are addressing issues of social isolation, of abandonment, of abuse in many cases, sadly. So we want to be looking at that. We obviously need to be paying attention to the effects of the opioid crisis that is affecting our country, but most especially Ohio. Last year, it was just announced that over 45,000 people died as a result of opioid addiction. And so we have to be paying attention to what the impact that is having on families and on our communities. How can we be of assistance to the families in our parishes that are suffering from this affliction? What we're seeing now, quite frankly, is grandparents having to take care of their grandchildren, and they need our help. So how do we best do that? Unfortunately and sadly, Ohio has a very high rate of suicide. And so we want to be sure that we are addressing, again, those issues of social isolation and loneliness. And of course, our work continues for those who need just general, everyday emergency assistance, whether it is to help pay the rent or utilities. We operate food pantries, and we have to continue that work as well.
You had mentioned about the Bishop's Appeal, and we know that that's a wonderful opportunity for people to contribute to help with social services and with Catholic Charities. What would you tell the folks that are listening now what they can do especially to help people who are in need, and especially right now, maybe through their parishes?
First and always pray. Pray for those in need and pray for those of us, those who are involved in bringing assistance to them. Secondly is participate. Please participate in the Bishop's Appeal. For me, it's never been about raising a particular amount. There is a need that the church has, of course, but the reality is the greater need is for participation. Right now, 25% of the households that we solicit participate in the appeal. So the greater the participation, the more money that can be raised, and the more people can be helped. We never have enough resources. The need always outpaces our resource. And finally, I think become involved in volunteering. So praying, giving, volunteering, these are all ways I think that we can be called to assist.
Steve Caratini, in the final minute of our time together, is there a website or a way that people can get a hold of your services through Catholic Charities and through social concerns as to how they can help?
Sure. That website is at ccdoy.org, and there will be a listing of all of the services that our various Catholic Charities agencies offer throughout the diocese.
Well, Steve Chiartini, thank you so much for being with us, and God bless you in your work and especially in your ministry of social concerns.
Thank you so much, Father.
For Wineskins, I'm Father Jim Korda. The Feast of St. Vincent de Paul is celebrated on Thursday. To tell us more about this holy priest is Ron Puhala. He is from Holy Family Church in Poland.
St. Vincent de Paul died in Paris on September 27, 1660, and was canonized in 1737. His feast was previously celebrated on July 19th, so that seminarians taught by the Vincentians could celebrate the feast at the end of the academic year. Born in France to a poor family, he became a priest at the age of 19. For a few years, he was pastor of a parish and then a chaplain to the galley slaves in Paris. But it was in a catechetical apostolate to the peasants of the French countryside that Vincent found his particular vocation. In 1619, he met Francis de Sales and Jane Frances de Chantal, and in 1622 he became superior of the convents of the Visitation in Parish, a post he held until his death. In 1625 he gathered together a group that would be the basis of the Congregation of the Missions, known later as the Vincentians. Composed of both priests and brothers, the congregation was to engage in parish missions among the poor and uneducated. The congregation was approved in Rome in 1633. In 1633, the first member of the Daughters of Charity were gathered together under the direction of Louise Marillac, who died in 1660. These women were to be engaged in a social apostolate and works of charity. For 60 years, France benefited from the charitable works of Saints Vincent de Paul, the Congregation of the Missions, and the Daughters of Charity. Vincent de Paul died in the autumn of 1660 and was canonized by Pope Clement XII. Pope Leo XIII named him patron of all charitable works throughout the Catholic world. The prayers of the Mass are taken from the Missal of the Vincentians. The notion of service is central to the spirituality of St. Vincent, as is the virtue of simplicity. His apostolate can be summarized in two of his sayings. It is not sufficient for me to love God if I do not love my neighbor, and I belong to God and to the poor. This great apostle of charity says in the letter quoted in the office of the readings, "It is our duty to prefer the service of the poor to everything else and to offer such service as quickly as possible. Do not become upset or feel guilty if you interrupted your prayer to serve the poor." In the prayer over the gifts we pray, "Lord, you helped St. Vincent to imitate the love he celebrated in these mysteries. By the power of this sacrifice, may we also become an acceptable gift to you." In the prayer after the communion, we ask that the example and prayers of St. Vincent will help us to imitate your Son in preaching the good news to the poor. The antiphon for the canticle of Zechariah describes Vincent as one who consoled the sorrowful, defended the rights of the orphan, and generously aided widows. The relevance of St. Vincent de Paul is that his example urges us to respond to the need for evangelization in the contemporary society and to promote authentic social values. St. Vincent tells us in the Office of Readings, even though the poor are often rough and unrefined, we must not judge them for external appearances. If you consider the poor in the light of faith, then you will observe that they are taking the place of the Son of God who chose to be poor. On his deathbed, when asked to bless all his works, Vincent responded, "He who began the work will bring it to completion." For Wineskins, I'm Ron Puhala.
Hello and welcome to Spotlight. I'm Father Jim Korda. During this series, we're going to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Diocese of Youngstown. And joining me now is Sister Joyce Candidi from the Oblates. Welcome to our show.
Thank you, Father. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sister, I know anniversaries are special for anyone or any institution. Why is it important as a religious woman to celebrate anniversaries?
It's important because I'm just thinking about my own, although it'll be 50 years that I joined the Oblate Sisters. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to kind of look back, to take stock, to thank God for the many people that were in our lives, that were in my own life, and to maybe reprioritize a bit. Are my priorities in order? Do I need to do some readjusting? And I think they're wonderful times that kind of cause us to stop, take stock, and then to move ahead.
Now, Sister, how long have you personally been here in the Diocese of Youngstown?
Actually, I've been in the diocese for 50 years. Maybe on and off. I was in India a couple times, one time a year and a half, another time I was in Pittsburgh for about a year, but the rest I was always had the opportunity to minister and serve in this diocese.
So you remember, obviously, some past anniversaries, how joyous it is when we do gather to celebrate that. Now, let's talk about the Oblate Sisters. We know that they were invited to the Diocese of Youngstown when it was formed. Tell us a little bit about the history of that.
Yes. Of course, we know Youngstown Diocese was formed in 1943, and in 1946, two of our sisters, Sister Clara and Sister Chiarina, had permission to come to the Youngstown Diocese because they had relatives here that were in business, and to ask for funds for donations because our mother house in Grottaferrata had been bombed during the Second World War. So Bishop McFadden welcomed the sisters, was very generous, introduced them to some friends, and eventually even introduced them to other bishops. They were successful in this drive, if you will. But within, I think, 6 months of their coming, he invited them to consider beginning a foundation in the diocese. So they wrote to the Mother General at the time. She was very open to this. And I would say even within a year of their coming, Bishop McFadden and Monsignor Andrew Prokop traveled to Italy to meet the Mother General and to even get a concrete list of names of the sisters that Mother promised to send. And there were actually 10.
Well, it's interesting because as you think of that as a young diocese is just starting, and there would have been so much on the bishop's plate to really get it organized and to get it settled, and thinking how important it would be for parish life and community life to have religious women present. We do know that there were other religious congregations that were already present, but to have another congregation come in, how significant is that? And is that normal in dioceses where they were just created to invite other communities in?
Right. I think the bishop knew his new diocese. He knew that there were many immigrants. And one of the first things he said to the sisters, he said, I have thousands of Italian immigrants in this diocese. He said, they're first generation. And he said, so your community would be able to serve them well and teach their children and to help those families integrate themselves in the United States church and culture. So the sisters, of course, did not know English, but I would dare say within 1 year of their coming here, they were already teaching catechism at 2 parishes in the diocese.
And let's talk about those parishes that they served initially. What were those?
Our Lady of Perpetual Help in McDonald, the very first parish. The sisters lived in an old hotel on Ohio Avenue. And then St. Anthony Parish in Youngstown.
Obviously, the Italians at St. Anthony's were very prevalent there. That would have been a national parish. Yes. I'm interested in McDonald. Why McDonald? Was there a reason for that?
I think it was primarily because the property. They were supposed to actually build a house in Garrettsville. And that, for some reason, did not come together or gel. And so the bishop was able to find a convent for these 12 sisters. And there was this building available on Ohio Avenue. And I think that's sort of the providence that led them there. But they loved the McDonald community, and they were great people in helping the sisters.
Let's talk about the welcoming of people. I'm sure that when the sisters came, they were not only welcomed by the bishop, obviously, and the priest, but by the people themselves. Why is it so important to have that involvement of the lay people with religious communities?
I think it's part of being church. When the sisters first came, the priests took care of their spiritual needs. The bishop, of course, was overseeing everything and making sure that they had all that they needed. But the sisters told so many stories to me and to all the others my age and younger, how the people would leave food on the doorsteps, or they would introduce them to their friends. And it's just the beautiful aspect of, again, the people of God working together. Religious, laity, clergy, all for the betterment of the church, for the children, for the young people coming up into the church and how they could serve them. And I think this is it was just a wonderful example of cooperation.
Let's talk about your community in Italy. And it started in Grottaferrata, obviously in Rome too.
Yes.
Where else is the community stationed?
We have actually 3 houses in Rome. All of them actually serve clergy. One of them is the generalate, but we also have about 25 priests that live there and 2 others. Then we are in Grottaferrata, we are in Foggia, San Remo, and just scattered, I think about 11 or 12 houses in Trevi, various houses all up from north to southern part of Italy.
Sister, you mentioned you were in India as well. Is the community still flourishing there?
Yes, we started 25 years ago, and they too are celebrating their anniversary. I can't believe it because myself and another sister were the first 2 that literally began the foundation there, and they're flourishing. We have about 45 Indian sisters. There are 7 of them are serving in Italy. Many are in India itself. So it's flourishing very nicely.
To receive more information on that and other issues, and to listen to Wineskins, visit the website of the Catholic Diocese of Youngstown at www.doi.org. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. It was in Dungannon, Ohio, in Columbiana County, that one of the first group of Catholics settled. St. Philip Neri, the first parish in all northern Ohio, was founded in 1817 under the title of St. Paul's Settlement. It was to visit this settlement that Father Edward Fenwick, the Apostle of Ohio, made his first trip to northern Ohio. 4 years later, Cincinnati was chosen as a see city in the state of Ohio, and Fenwick was selected as the first bishop. Today, St. Philip Neri remains the oldest parish in the Diocese of Youngstown, but it is also one of the smallest. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future.
By the time we can walk, each of us yearns for the joy that comes from being able to do for ourselves. Church World Service believes that being self-reliant is a joy everyone should share. So around the block or around the world, share the joy. Church World Service. 33 million Americans have descended into poverty. And as their futures fall, so does our nation's.
Our song today is by the Daughters of St. Paul. It is from their CD entitled Sing Your Praise.
Come into
And now I'll share my reflections on the readings for the 25th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Do you have expectations that are not being met? Ask the young woman who was expecting an engagement ring on Valentine's Day and instead got a box of chocolates. Or ask the young father who expected one day to walk his daughter down the aisle at her wedding and he dies suddenly in a car accident. Or ask the elderly woman who is at the ripe old age of 95, who never expected to bury her 3 children. You see, we all have expectations that are not being met. The longer and more carefully you read the New Testament, you will discover that Jesus was not what anybody expected, not anybody. In Mark chapter 9, Jesus told his disciples of his approaching betrayal, his death, and his resurrection. Mark says that they didn't understand and were afraid to ask. Then in today's gospel, Jesus finds them arguing as to who was the most important among them. He said, "Whoever wants to rank first among you must be the last of all and the servant of all." That was not what they expected to hear. So what do we expect of Jesus? Is he not functioning as the miracle worker to take away our cancer? Is he not turning out to be the one who listens to our prayers and answers them? Are we expecting Jesus to keep us healthy and make us wealthy? Be careful of what we expect of Jesus. We may find ourselves carrying an even heavier cross on our shoulders than what we have imagined. Jesus will often surprise us by not meeting our expectations. And why? Because he was dedicated to serving God more than satisfying us. And it is precisely in serving God that Jesus is serving us. In other words, Jesus related to people in terms of what they truly needed, not what they thought they needed. Jesus issues us an invitation. We are not so much invited to come to him as we are invited to follow him. And instead of thinking that Jesus falls short of our expectations, he is perhaps beyond our expectations. The poet W.H. Auden once wrote, "He is the way, follow him, through the land of unlikeness. You will see rare beasts and have unique adventures." Those who have actually and sincerely followed Jesus have found him to exceed their expectations. In other words, the unexpected Jesus is a Jesus beyond our expectations. If there is in you a hunger for food you have never tasted, and a thirst that remains unquenched, if you wonder wistfully about roads not taken that call to the emptiness in your depths, and if there is a mysterious and incurable nostalgia in you, then perhaps you should consider following Jesus. The brightness of his gladness can enkindle in us unexpected sparks. For Wineskins, I'm Father Jim Corda. Use this day to count your blessings and see how special and important you are in God's eyes, and in turn, share your blessings and treasures with others and with the Church. Wineskins is made possible by the annual Bishop's Appeal, the Catholic Communication Campaign, and St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts. The program is produced by CTNY, the Catholic Telecommunications Network of Youngstown. I'm your host, Father Jim Corda, wishing you a blessed Sunday and a safe week.